Hi, everyone. This is DeFi Dad. You're watching episode 32 of Yield TV. All right. Hey, everyone. It's Friday, November 13th. Friday the 13th in 2020. Nothing to be afraid of there. Today, we're going to interview Matt Leising, who is a celebrated journalist and author of the popular book Out of the Ether. And the book itself, and forgive me, I'm going to quote the book description on Amazon because I think it does the best job of describing what Matthew covers in it. The book covers the aftermath of the heist, or aka the DAO hack, and it explains at extreme lengths it explains the extreme lengths the victims of the theft and the creators of Ethereum went to in order to try and limit the damage. The book covers the creation of Ethereum, an explanation of the nature of blockchain and cryptocurrency, and the activities of a colorful cast of hackers, coders, investors, and thieves. Matt, welcome to Yield TV. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah. Just super excited to let more of these stories be told by you, the author. So you're an incredible storyteller. Just congrats on the book. I know it's been very popular,
Thank you.
not only in our community, but I think it's really exciting to think about all the folks out there that have a general sort of interest in blockchain or cryptocurrency that will kind of get exposed to the epic, like insurmountable odds that Ethereum overcame in the early days. And I think best of all, Matt was saying this before we got started, it's helpful to know where you came from, to know where we might be going. And anyways, just excited to learn more about this. So why don't we start from the beginning? I think everyone's always curious to know the origin story of anyone in our community, and curious to know, as a journalist, can you tell us more about like your career before actually writing the book?
Yeah, sure. I've been a reporter since about 2002. And when I moved to New York in 2004, there was basically, it was really hard to find a job. I went all over town trying to get work, and the one place I was hiring was Bloomberg. I never really envisioned myself being a business reporter, but I needed a job, and over the years it worked out really, really well for me because I started writing about like stuff that I had never even known anything about, like futures markets, the oil, the global oil industry, and so I got pretty quickly into this stuff like derivatives and futures and kind of complicated stuff. But as I say in the book, I really like complicated things. I like trying to figure them out and then hopefully sharing them with people in a way that you can understand it. So that beat kind of evolved into what we call market structure, which is how certain markets like fixed income or futures and derivatives, how they work or they don't work. Is there manipulation going on? What are regulators doing about it? A big test for this was after the financial crisis in 2008. The swaps market, one of the biggest markets in the world, had been completely unregulated up to that point, and it had a big effect on how the global banking system almost crashed. So the Dodd-Frank Act was born, and a big part of that was regulating the swaps market for the first time. So I covered that really closely, and it just kind of like from the Treasury white paper through to Congress and then through how the CFTC enacted all those rules over the years. And that's kind of in a nutshell what market structure is about. So after going through the financial crisis in around 2015, early 2015, I finally had the light bulb go off over my head about what blockchain meant for all this stuff that I was writing about. I had known about Bitcoin for a few years and kind of dismissed it. I really didn't get it. I didn't understand it. But when I understood what the blockchain part of it meant, I realized that, this could change how everything I write about works, like in the back end. Wall Street, I thought, would be very interested in trying to implement some of this stuff with, either permission chains or using public chains to just kind of, like get more efficient, become like, upgrade their systems. And so from 2015 on, I've written about blockchain and basically where it intersects with finance. Early on, that was like companies like R3 and Hyperledger, and I'm forgetting the one with Blythe Masters. But
yeah, I'm forgetting it as well, but maybe that's a sign of something.
yeah. Digital asset holdings, right? So
yeah.
So all of those things were kind of floating around. And then in 2016, I finally got around to learning about Ethereum. I met Joe Lubin in Bushwick at Consensus, and just sort of like when he explained what they were doing and like the platform that Ethereum was giving people for, basically writing code and creating smart contracts that could do almost anything you want on top of this global distributed system of computers that reaches consensus. That's when I was really just like, wow, I was blown away that it had gone from Bitcoin to this kind of like almost unlimited potential. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I've been, how I got to this point. And so then in 2016, the DAO was hacked, and I watched it happen. I remember the day it happened, but Ethereum was less than a year old. It wasn't really being used for anything at that point, and it just didn't quite fit with what I was writing about at Bloomberg. But it just fascinated me, and watching the whole way it played out with the hard fork and everything. So later that year, an editor came to me and said, "Hey, we always do a heist issue for the magazine. Do you have any good heist stories?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." So I knew right away that the DAO needed that kind of magazine treatment, like something like 5,000 words to really kind of tell that amazing story. So that came out in 2017, and I used that as like the basis for the book, because I knew you've got this really dramatic arc of the DAO getting hacked, and then good guy hackers coming together and forming this group, the Robin Hood group, to like save the rest of the money and other people. And it's just like this fascinating story. So I knew that I could use that as like a dramatic through line for a book that would also tell the story of Vitalik Buterin and the co-founders and how everything kind of came out of Bitcoin and created Ethereum, and then got us to, I leave off around the end of 2016, early 2017 in the history. So that's it in a bit of a long-winded description.
Yeah. Why don't we, since we're, back in time at this point in the story, can you, share like some of the most interesting things that you uncovered about the DAO hack? Because I think like that's what grabs everyone's attention at first is, you're really telling a coming of age story, I feel like, of Ethereum. But you're highlighting just like, I mean, for me, it's like the story is, wow, like how lucky are we that all of this sort of worked out, and the fact that like where we are today in 2020, which I want to get your perspective too on like what you think, having seen Ethereum come about to where we are in 2020 and kind of seeing like DeFi use cases start to really catch fire. But anyways, going back to the DAO hack, like what was some of the most interesting things that you uncovered in your research that I think the average person doesn't probably know about?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, I'd like to say, like, the book is not just about the DAO. It actually, the DAO stuff kind of makes up a small percentage of the book, because it is a full history of how Ethereum came to be. I think that, but DAO specific, I think one of the interesting things, and something that people need to know right off the bat, is that there wasn't just one DAO hack. There were several. There was the big one on Friday. That's the one everybody knows about. That's where the $55 million figure comes from that was stolen in front of everybody that day. It was just an amazingly brilliant exploit. It used two different smart contracts. It exploited a bug that had not been pointed out yet. Like, there are a lot of flaws in the DAO had been pointed out. There was a moratorium. People wanted to like stop the DAO and just kind of take a break because there was so many security issues. But it turned out when that Friday in June of 2016, the bug that was exploited had not been publicly made public before, and So that was the main hack. Once that was accomplished on the blockchain, as your listeners will know, that attack contract is now public. Like, if you know what you're doing, you can go in and like see the code for that contract and how it worked. And so the thing that people were freaking out about was, yes, $55 million had been stolen, but there was roughly another 200 million left in the DAO, and it was vulnerable because you can't just patch this up, with a smart contract. It takes weeks of like consensus building, and you have to vote for a software update. So like, it's like the bank is being robbed, and like the way into the vault is like right there,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I think what happened was people figured that out, and they kind of took the code that the original hacker used and started testing whether they wanted to do the same attack. And there was some like back and forth with that, little tests here and there over the next several days, but it wasn't until Tuesday that the second major attack began. This one drained about 230,000 ether, I think.
Wow.
It was in the millions of dollars. And so by this point, the good guy hackers had assembled, and they were all on Skype meetings and, like figuring out how they needed to protect the DAO. But they were worried about the legal implications, about whether they'd be seen as bad guys. So they had replicated the attack contract themselves. They had been gathering ether and DAO tokens to fuel the attack, but they were hesitant to push the button. So on that Tuesday, when it started getting drained, like seriously, a second time, they said, all right, screw it, we don't have a choice. And they launched their counterattack. There's a famous tweet from Absa. He says, do not panic, DAO is being securely drained, all in capital letters. So, from the very beginning, it's a very complicated set of circumstances. There were several different hacks. So that was the one. The second hack was also sloppy, in my opinion. The Friday hack, whoever did that covered the tracks really well. It's very, very hard using blockchain forensics to backtrack and to see where stuff came from. They used a whole bunch of mixers, some of which don't exist anymore. Yet on the Tuesday attack, which I consider a copycat, I think they kind of just cut and pasted the code, and they sent some money from an exchange through Shapeshift and then right onto the blockchain. And you can see within like 4 stops, it's at the contract that was used to attack the DAO. So I was able to backtrack and figure out, the trail there. So, and I'm just a reporter, so I find that fascinating. And the other thing, I guess, is that I was able to put a name to that attack and somebody who was involved, because I had sources at that exchange who helped me link there was a withdrawal of Bitcoin that went onto through Shapeshift, and then went to the Ethereum blockchain. And so I could trace where that went to the attack contract. That's also the attack contract that address sent an encrypted message to the good guy hackers, basically saying, hey, what are you doing? Like, leave the money alone. Don't take this money that I'm stealing. So that was encrypted. Somebody who had the key to that shared the unencrypted message with me. So I knew, here's a bad guy address, and here's Poloniex, and we linked it up, and I was able to find a guy in Tokyo named Tomoaki Sato who claimed, that was his account, and he claims that other people had access to it, and it was probably them who carried out this attack. He said he didn't have anything to do with it, but that's all new original reporting in my book.
Wow. Yeah. And can you remind me, like, do you believe him? Do you believe that someone else had access to it? Because it's definitely a convenient excuse for what could have happened. And I guess then, like, where does the trail lead from there? Like, are you able to ever track down the folks that are connected with him?
Yeah. So whether I believe him, it's a plausible story. I guess it's definitely possible. People back in 2016, I think, were, he was acting, he says he was acting as kind of a broker for other people who wanted to buy crypto, but weren't able to do it themselves. So I kind of describe that in the book as like somebody, like a Charles Schwab account. If you're giving your money to Charles Schwab, you want to have access to that money. You don't want to have somebody say, "Oh no, I'll just trust me, I'll take care of it." So Tomoaki claims that he had given, access to these other people to his Poloniex account because their money was in that account being used to buy Bitcoin and Ether and other crypto. I just kind of leave it up to the reader, and I try to lay out in great detail. We had a long on-the-record conversation, and I quote him extensively. And I think it's my job to just present his side of the story as well as I could. So I leave it up to the reader. I'm not claiming that he did anything. I don't have that proof, but there is a link here that didn't exist before. As to whether I was able to go forward with this, I wasn't. It's very difficult to track like where that money moved, especially on the Ethereum Classic blockchain. There's the dev tools there are much less developed than on Ethereum. So that's also just, I just kind of found it a little bit beyond my purview in the book, because I had a lot of other things I wanted to do, like tell the story of Vitalik and the co-founders and how everybody came together to create it.
Yeah, let's hop forward a moment. So we jumped to 2020. Do you think we're better off today from a security standpoint? We do continue to see, call it a hack or a financial exploit. Flash loans have definitely been a big part of that problem, but also it's an innovation, I guess, that we all value a flash loan. But anyways, 2020 has had its share of challenges. How do you compare the two? We're 4 years or a little less than 4 years out. But it's a much more mature community at this point. But I guess are funds safer today in Ethereum than they were in 2016?
Well, I think you're right. It is a much more mature community, and I think there are people with track records out there for 5-6 years now. So I would point to the people in my book, like Lefteris and Jordi Bailina and Griff Green and Vitalik and Joe Lubin. These are folks that are doing things and have been doing things for a long time. So I think people would I think logically trust in those projects that those people are backing or building themselves more than like Sushi Chef, who's an anonymous person. And it's a great idea and really interesting that so much money can be amassed in so small a time. But you see what happens when you don't know who's behind a project. So and that's sort of, in my opinion, we're making the same mistakes as the DAO all over again. And so but it somewhat feels like you can't get around this problem because it's an open community. It's anybody can do whatever they want. People can make their own choices about where they invest. Do your own research, take all the precautions you want. But I think there always will be a Wild West element to this. So I think building blocks are increasingly becoming very interesting, because these projects, even though there is fraud and a lot of scammy stuff, there are real people building real financial applications and Web3 applications that it just doesn't stop. And I find that really fascinating, and I'm optimistic about that, because the community here behind Ethereum is unlike, I think, any other decentralized sort of financial community. And they've been through the fire several times, and they just keep going.
Matt, who do you find to be the greatest supporting actors for Vitalik? I mean, he's clearly, at the end of the day, I think most folks in our community, find him to be, whether he wants it or not, which I think he has been very open about like wanting this to be a community that is never ruled by one, but all of us really look to him. I mean, he's a very admirable person. I personally find him to be remarkably selfless, despite all the power that he could have. I'm curious, yeah, can you kind of highlight from the book some of those like greatest supporting actors for Vitalik over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I agree with you about Vitalik and being selfless. It goes back to his childhood. Like his mom told me when they'd go shopping, he never wanted anything. You know, he just doesn't have an interest in material possessions. He would wear holes into his shoes, you know, before his dad had to force him to like get some new ones.
Wow.
So he's just always been that way. Even though I'm sure many times over, you know, on paper he's a billionaire and he's got potentially a huge amount of power, you know, to like guide and lead this community. So I'm a huge admirer of him because I love it when people have that sort of power at their fingertips, but they're humble about it and use it in responsible ways. And it's all too rare in the world today. So I think going back, I mean, I think the names I mentioned before are kind of the people who stick with me. I didn't mention Vlad Zamfir. Vlad is a great foil to Vitalik. I think they're both brilliant. And I think we probably wouldn't be at ETH 2.0 without Vlad and the kind of competition that he's had with Vitalik about how to do proof of stake. I think, like I said, I think Jordi Bailina and Griff Green are doing amazing things. On like more on the charitable side of the equation, and with like Giddith, I think Fabian Bogelstetter and Marjorie Hernandez are doing amazing stuff with Luxo, and you know they've been around for forever. You know, Fabian and Alex Van de Sande, you know, they were the co-creators of the Mist wallet way back when. And you know, Left Terrace is still doing great stuff in Berlin. And so, you know, of course, there's Joe Lubin, who I know he kind of divides opinion amongst the community, but I don't think you can say. I mean, Consensus, you have to admit, has been a great incubator for a lot of projects like MetaMask and others that, you know, are the tools that everybody in this world uses on a daily basis. So. You know, and then I think you've got other people who sort of fell by the wayside or went different ways out of the co-founders group. Charles Hoskinson, you know, went off and is doing his own thing. Anthony Diorio is kind of doing the same thing. You know, so there's other people. Obviously, there is sorry, I'm spacing on his name. What is it? Gavin Wood, of course, with what he's doing with Polkadot. And
it's a lot of names to keep track of. I actually, there's so many unique names in the community too. It's funny being an easier one there, but yeah.
And then like the other big guy is obviously Jeff, and what he kind of dropped out of the world. Jeff Wilkie, I think he did video game stuff in Amsterdam. So, you know, those were the people who surrounded Vitalik and made Ethereum a reality. And I think it's been fascinating to see the different ways they all went.
Matt, let's talk about, there's so many things here I could just dig into with you, but keeping it more at like the macro level, what do you think are some of the lessons that you're telling all of these stories along the way, and like, what do you think are some of the lessons that have stuck with the Ethereum community? Some of the lessons that have had an impact on like, you know, who we are today, and I guess not repeating the same mistakes of the past.
I think one of the things that fascinated me to learn through the reporting of the book was that I feel like Ethereum succeeded in spite of itself. I think it was such a good idea that it survived a lot of political infighting, and the early co-founders were a really mixed bag of people that just sort of Vitalik kind of gathered around him simply because they were people who expressed an early interest in his white paper. He didn't he didn't do much vetting, and I think that kind of came back to bite them, because within 6 months you had the first purge of people from the co-founder group. There was already a lot of animosity, a lot of like politics were being played. There was the rivalry between people in Switzerland and people in Toronto, and I think it probably hurt the early efforts, because a lot of energy had to go into sort of maintaining relationships between people, where it could have been going into developing and doing other stuff. So, and then and also I think it's interesting for people to know, like, from the very beginning, Ethereum never, like, the timeline has always been like in 2 weeks, and then there's another 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and 2 weeks. So when people are complaining about like ETH 2.0 finally coming around, I interviewed Vitalik at DevCon 3 in Cancun in 2017, and he said proof of stake is probably going to happen by the end of the year. So that was 2017.
Yeah.
So that's always been the part of this community, and it takes more time than people ever promise you. Then I think I think that I think we're talking about lessons learned. I think people have been a little smarter with the money that they're allowing. I'm not really sure. It's hard because when you have this community that's open to anyone in the world, you have constantly new people streaming in, and sort of now they're in the mix. And so, do they know the history? Do they know like the risks that they're taking, or do they have to learn it the hard way, so that we'll always have a group of people who are kind of like rushing in, sort of just hoping to get rich, while you have other people who have been around and have been building and doing stuff like that. So it's a really tough community to sum up in one way, I think.
Yeah. No, agreed on that. I actually really like what you were pointing out about Ethereum succeeding in spite of itself. I've only been in the community a little over 3 years, and there's just been such intense ups and downs, and so I really missed the first 2 solid years of everything that happened. I guess the first 3 years, and it feels like there's, like, the idea you were saying, the idea is just such a remarkable idea that it's difficult to turn away from. And I don't know if you call it like a first mover advantage. At this point, the network effects of what's been built feels impossible to overcome. I can say, like, for myself, I'm not a developer, but I'm using all of the different Ethereum and DeFi applications. And I mean, it's overwhelming because there's so many being released. And I, as maybe like a more advanced user, can recognize how all of these applications are being stacked, and they're just becoming more and more powerful. Originally, it was things like you have an Oracle and you say, oh, of course, well, everybody needs an Oracle. And so Chainlink had that narrative down. But now we're at a point where it's so much more than that. You're just seeing, and that's why the money Legos parallel, I think, is really great for explaining the power of composability. But I'm curious, how do you, like, what is most interesting to you right now in 2020 based on our origin story? Like, how do you explain where Ethereum is today? There's like 15 billion now in total value locked. DeFi use cases have actually proven that we are past the days of you have an application with maybe like 50 users, which was true in 2017. Now we're at a point where you clearly have thousands within each of these applications. And then, arguably, I think everyone's trying to figure out, like, is it hundreds of thousands of users at this point, or are we double counting wallets? Anyways, how do you view Ethereum in 2020?
Yeah. Well, I like your point about the network effect. I think that's very important here. And it reminds me, I've worked at Bloomberg for 16 years or so. Every so often, every year or two, there's a new Bloomberg killer, right? That's come out, or somebody touts it as, oh, this is finally going to knock Bloomberg off of its perch. The Bloomberg terminal is, pretty much ubiquitous on Wall Street, and on the buy side, and it never even really comes close, because the network effect that Bloomberg has created over the years, and is just like really, really difficult to break into, and to, pull somebody away from their Bloomberg terminal is very difficult. I think Ethereum is building the same sort of effect here, with its community and the things that are constantly being built and released, like you said. So when you have that critical mass, it's very difficult to, it's got to be a value proposition that's just too good to be true, or too good to pass up, to sort of start chipping away at it. The other thing, I think people need to remember is, all these folks that are in the community and developing and coding and doing PR or anything, they're invested in Ether, like they're off of their Ether supply, or their Bitcoin supply, or, they're in crypto, and they live the life. So it's also like, are you going to like ditch all your ETH for like a new thing? So that is a very sticky kind of situation to have, in a good way for Ethereum, so that, that monetary incentive is there. I think now, looking forward in 2020, it's fascinating to just, like, I hate to repeat myself, but people just keep building, and things are moving forward. The thing that I'm excited about is MetaMask going mobile, where you can now, now we're really starting, because the other promise of Ethereum is not just like decentralized finance, it's Web3, and it's like Gavin Wood had this vision, I think, most clearly early on, about a centralized web, where users are now much more in control of how they interact with other websites and other people on the internet. Your data, can become yours again. It won't be a commodity to be bought and sold, because there will be a money element to this internet, where, as we all know, there's never been a money element to the internet, and that's why data became the coin of the realm. So everybody, from Google to Facebook, they figured out, all right, I'm going to mine all of this data. It's going to become incredibly valuable and important, and so we see what that has led us to, in the Internet 2.0. So I'm really excited. I really want to get to that Web 3.0 experience, and I think we're seeing more and more of that, on a weekly basis, because that has, I think, much far more far-reaching implications for, like, democracy and information and disinformation and things that we really need to address in the world, that are huge problems. It looks like we didn't have as much, in election interference this year as in 2016, but that was a huge real-world case to me that just proved that something needs to change. And so I really want to see that part of it develop.
So Matt, you were mentioning you've also written a lot about the enterprise use cases in Ethereum. I'm curious, in light of all of the developments in the past year, especially with like DeFi becoming, really the killer use case, like the thing that even the mainstream is learning about with Ethereum. I'm curious, like, are you digging more into DeFi now than the enterprise? Like, I guess I ask this, somewhat of a loaded question. I've always been very bored by the enterprise. Now, it was exciting to me in 2017 when I was looking around thinking, like, well, what else is built? And enterprise seemed like low-hanging fruit that could be built sooner. But I think there's something now about DeFi is such a like a power to the people type move. I mean, we're at this place where as long as you can manage an Ethereum wallet, and I think like the bigger challenge is, getting someone internet access if they're in a country where that's more difficult, or it's just, too costly to get internet access. But we're at a point where anyone can plug into these really powerful peer-to-peer money applications. And sometimes I almost like, I'm like looking for people to realize, like, this is what we were all building towards. We're not even close to being there yet, but like, recognize when you zoom out, like, that we are trading, we are lending, we are borrowing, we are, using really sophisticated automated yield farming strategies. Like what the hell, like you got to recognize at this point, part of the challenge is we have to communicate this to the masses, which is why I was so excited about your book. We have to communicate this to the masses. Like I don't know what you're waiting for someone to literally hold the phone up to your hand and for you to for them to press the buttons for you. At some point, we just have to, education has to be like one of the biggest initiatives for the community.
Yeah, I agree with you. The challenge I have as a reporter is, and especially with the DeFi stuff, like I keep going back to Sushi Swap, but that was a crazy, like 3 or 4 days, and then it was gone, right? So, it's a challenge to write about something that's moving that fast, and also, as I said at the beginning of the show, my beat is kind of like where these worlds of finance and DeFi and blockchain intersect.
Right.
And so, I have a hard time writing about like yield farming for a Bloomberg audience. I think it's just it's tricky,
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is write more about the big level stuff that's happening, like the switch to proof of stake, and what's going on with the Ethereum network in general, so that it can grow and scale to handle those hundreds of thousands of users that everybody hopes for soon in the future. And then I also think I'm sure you saw that like the AP used Ethereum to broadcast its how it was calling the presidential election. Reddit is using Ethereum to give out loyalty points, and so there's a lot of like uses like that where I find it seems like every couple of weeks another big name is coming out and using not just but the Ethereum public chain, and so I think it's working its way into all sorts of areas of business and commerce and entertainment, and I think once you need to get true believers out there to tell the story of it, and then I think once it starts spreading, people see the benefits of it pretty quickly.
Matt, do you see any tipping points for this? Could be more general for crypto adoption, which encompasses everything that we're talking about with Ethereum, DeFi, even like voting on the blockchain. Any tipping points that you think about as a journalist? Because you're, again, like one of the things I really appreciate is you were mentioning there's all these like micro stories, especially over the summer. It was overwhelming to everyone. And then you have to think about, well, what's really worth highlighting? So yeah, just curious, like, what sort of tipping points do you think about? And also hoping you can kind of touch upon your thoughts with the pandemic and what that has or hasn't done for adoption in crypto.
I mean, I think the one tipping point everyone understands is just having crypto be easy to use to buy stuff, like getting to that point where it's not a big deal to just hold up your phone to a QR reader, and say, yeah, I want to pay for my groceries with Ethereum, with Ether. That, I don't think we're close to that at this point, honestly. But that will be, I think, a big deal when it happens. The thing was on a panel the other day talking about just, DeFi and how it's disrupting everything. And we had a CFTC commissioner on, and we were talking about, when might the U.S. issue a digital U.S. dollar? I think that will be a big deal because, not just, it's not just DeFi startups that are figuring out the efficiencies here. Central banks are realizing that if their reserves were digitized, you not only can send it much faster, you can reduce the error rate, and it brings about all sorts of new efficiency gains. And that's really kind of, if you look back at what the internet did for the economy, it just made everything so much more efficient that people were now able to wring out revenue where they couldn't before. So it's kind of like I think the money aspect to it is something that will be a huge tipping point. And then I think going back to my Web 3.0, I think when when there's a full ecosystem there, where I have an alternative to Twitter and Facebook and Google that is, decentralized and uses Filecoin, and is doing, like, I'm on MetaMask, and, all the pieces are working together, but where I don't really even have to worry about it. It's just like I've just switched over to a new app that is now, but it's all backed by Ethereum or another blockchain that, because the user experience has to be smooth. You don't want people to know what's really happening in the background, but you want it to be, in such a way that they're getting the same service, but they're now in control of their life online again.
Matt, you were mentioning earlier some of the stories that you've been trying to focus on, of course, lately is like the move to proof of stake. I'm wondering, I don't know if you get a chance to look at the analytics behind all the stories that you and others are publishing, especially in the crypto space, but I'm curious, like, what stories do you find are the most compelling to the Bloomberg audience, or at least for the audience that would read like out of the ether as well? Like, what stories beyond, you mentioned proof of stake? I ask this because sometimes I have a deep appreciation for the fact that you all are reporting on that, because it is so important. But then sometimes I find myself like kicking the ground saying, like, do they even need to know about this? Like, does the average person the average Bloomberg reader need to understand proof of stake, when I would argue it's a complicated topic to dig into? And, we've talked a little bit about some of the more obvious fundamentals going on with like just DeFi use cases. So anyways, what's interesting to the Bloomberg audience based on your experience?
Well, I think there's a couple things that brings to mind. First of all, a lot of, the financial world is shrinking. The post-Dodd-Frank regulations have really kind of taken a hit on a lot of banks and their trading capabilities and what they're able to buy and sell, compared to pre-2008. So you've seen a lot of people leave Wall Street and go into crypto, maybe straight into just trading, or maybe into starting startups and getting like their hands dirty with the code. So I think, like, especially like in the FX market, it's very similar to FX trading, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to make money at just straight up trading crypto because of the volatility. Of course, that comes with a lot of risk, but like these Wall Street guys, that's what they live for, these men and women. And so I think that's been one thing that is an interesting topic to Bloomberg readers. There's also, if you think about proof of stake and the way that Ethereum is trying to scale its network, you can also think of it as an investment story. Here's this network that is got a very dedicated group of users, and it's trying to grow. And it's also something you can invest in right now. In the early internet, you couldn't invest in, the TCP/IP protocol. You couldn't invest in like how things were being routed around the world. You could maybe get a chunk of like Netscape when it went public, but so there's a big shift here where you can invest in the ground layer of the network protocol and Ether, because it's necessary. It's a necessary element for all of this to work. So, maybe it's like a corporation, saying, okay, here's our 5-year plan, and we're going to grow, X amount, and they hope that has an effect on their stock price. So, I see these stories sometimes as like, here's the growth plan for Ethereum. It's taken a long time. It's complicated, but they're doing all of this so that they can process, 100x more transactions in a given amount of time than they can today. And so, I think some Bloomberg readers appreciate that as well. But there's still the bitter end, or there's like a hard group of people on Wall Street who just think it's still kind of a joke and it's all going to go away. And I get more email to that effect when I write stories than I do like saying, hey, this is really interesting. It's mostly people who don't want to don't want to kind of acknowledge that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't get the boatloads of compliments. The life of a journalist is you get all the criticisms. It's like going on a Yelp page for a restaurant. All the folks that have a great time tend to not write the reviews, and instead you see those who are are the most critical.
yeah.
That's interesting. What can we dig into that a moment? What if you can recall any of it, what are some of the specific criticisms that continue to come up from those that are just doubtful about Ethereum and crypto in general?
Well, it's as simple as they just don't think it's got any value to it. They don't, either they disagree with the value proposition that a distributed network brings, or they think it's all a scam. They think, I think, like, I don't know, Nouriel Roubini, I think he's still saying Bitcoin's going to go to zero, right? I mean, I don't know. So
Yeah.
it's what I write about in the book a little bit, to get back to that,
Yeah.
is that the beauty of Bitcoin was that people wanted it for a really long time. They didn't know it was Bitcoin, but they wanted digital cash in a way that was uncensorable and valid. And when Satoshi came up with his idea, that has value because people want that. They want to use it, and they
Mhm.
want to be able to send money value to anyone around the world without anyone being able to stop them. Whether that's valuable at $10 or 10,000 or 20,000, I don't know. But there are enough people in the world who believe in that and want it, so that therefore it has value. And so Ethereum is like the next level, in my opinion, of that, because now you've got a platform where you can start creating an alternative financial system. You can start creating an alternative internet, and we're all watching it being built right now in front of us. And so that has a value. And I don't to be honest, don't quite understand why people can't see that. I find it pretty obvious, but there are just some people who think it's all just ones and zeros, and it can't be worth anything.
Yeah, really interesting I think for those folks also, even just to watch the prices. Like, I think at the end of the day, like, we have the crypto community in general tends to be filled with lots of folks who have fundamental beliefs in like this technology changing the world, despite the fact there's also many folks who just are like, hey, number go up, I'm interested in this. But I find it insane in 2020 how anyone could even just look at the numbers and say, yeah, I'll just ignore where we're all going here, because that narrative is actually playing out now as well. And yeah, just can't imagine that. Matt, how about, speaking of prices and numbers, can you highlight like, what are the lessons you take away from 2018? Because like when you talk about the history of Ethereum, and you have this run up in 2016, 2017, 2018 is a very dark year. I mean, that's a really dark year in the history of crypto. And I would say in Ethereum, gosh, I guess you might be better to judge this, whether it's a worse year than the year of the DAO hack. But yeah, anyways, what lessons do you take from 2018, and what stuck with us through 2020?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because 2018 was basically, I was writing my book proposal and like trying to get it into shape to get a publisher. And I remember thinking like, man, this might fail, like,
Yeah.
and I was really kind of like, is this a good project to work on? And then so I was worried for a couple of weeks until I had the realization that no matter what happened, like the early history existed, and it's a great story and it should be told. So that kind of like freed me to just like, realize that this was worth doing. But yeah, it was, I remember specifically, and into early 2019, it felt like it could go away, like it just felt like
It really did. Yeah.
yeah, like ETH was under $100, I think, or
Yeah.
Bitcoin was down at 5 or something, or I don't remember, but and so I think, that's what I remember of that time period. And what is heartening to me, and I think what is interesting for the community, is that people just kept their heads down during that period and just kept building stuff and kept making what they wanted to make real. And now we would have seen the benefit of that. So lessons learned, I don't know. It's just like, it's again.
I think you called it out there, the idea of like continuing to build. And at the time I remember that became sort of a mantra about continuing to build. But I think at the end of the day, your feelings were many of our feelings. You were wondering like, gosh, like, could this go the other way? I think the way that I've always explained it though to friends and family is, there's no way in hell that everyone's about to shut their computer and say, well, that was that, and I'll move on with my life. There's too much money and there's too much passion at stake. And I think despite all the criticisms of the crypto community from like the legacy and traditional finance world, I think at the end of the day, there is just fortunately this perfect cocktail of money plus like intense passion and ego to change the world.
Yeah. And another thing that comes to mind there is, if you remember, 2017 was the crazy year around Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
I was in Los Angeles by then, and I was at bars, and I'd overhear people talking about Bitcoin, and Thanksgiving dinner was all about it, and then you had this huge influx of mom and pop sort of people who bought into it, and then I think about 99% of them got burned and probably lost everything, and so I think that was another hang-on effect that people in 2018, like the people who didn't know a lot about this, but they knew that there was a buzz about it and they wanted to get in on it, and they saw the number go up, day after day. When they all lose their money, I think it leaves a very bad taste in their mouth. And I think I saw something on Twitter the other day that the price run-ups we're seeing now have a very small retail component, and I think there's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. And I remember being at Burning Man in 2019 to report on the book, and thinking, and I would go to these events that they were holding there to try to like get Burning Man people into crypto and like their conducive, communities. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder how many of these people, just lost a lot of money like just a year ago. And I think, it's a significant knock-on effect to have that sort of run up and crash when you do need public adoption to get this, to the next level.
Yeah. I don't ever want to remember the feelings of like 2018. And I remember like going into 2019, I was following a few of the teams that actually would eventually come to define DeFi, but just, was somewhat skeptical. And other than like a maker, I was really just like, in a place where it's like, hey, I'm here. I'm excited, but I'm also, somewhat questioning. Like I actually had started working at Consensus at that time. So I was seeing all these use cases, and I was seeing all the intense amount of like work and a conveyor belt of smart people continue to flow into the space. But I was also simultaneously like watching the market and being like, whoa, like this thing like just won't stop correcting. And it was especially, I think it was more brutal for Ether than it was for those that were holding Bitcoin.
Yeah. And do you remember, I was part of the frenzy in 2017 because I bought my mom $100 worth of Bitcoin. I just wanted her to, for Christmas, I wanted her to like be able to check it out. And it cost me, I bought it on Coinbase for $100, and then and to move it to her wallet that I set up for her, because everybody should never leave their crypto on exchange. Always put it in your wallet. Cost me $30 to move that crypto, that $100. And so now it's down to 70. And then it just completely crashed. And so, but my point is that the network, like it was also a little bit distressing, I think, to people to see one of the things that Bitcoin always promised was almost free transactions, right? That you can send money anywhere around the world for just pennies. And here, when there was a huge demand, like the fees were just like through the roof.
Yeah.
And Ether has seen the same sort of issues with gas prices this year. And so I think, those are the times that give me pause, because it's like, it's almost, these networks need to be upgraded. They need to be made more robust, and the pipes need to get bigger, so that the promise here doesn't just kind of fail when you need it to work.
Matt, what do you think is the biggest threat to Ethereum today?
That's a good question.
You did allude earlier to it maybe being itself. I think we've sort of talked through that, kind of like drawing upon again some of what you cover in the book.
Yeah, I think if it can't scale for whatever reason, if ETH 2.0 doesn't work as people want it to, I think that could put a big dent in it, because it does need to be able to scale to move forward and to attract more users. I think that the other thing is that every smart contract, is built by somebody else. It's like there's the Ethereum protocol layer and then the smart contract layer. And so, I think if we had another DAO problem or something where there was a huge hack, I don't know if that would bring down the whole thing, but that's a tough question. I wonder if maybe even something like a digital dollar would have a knock-on effect, because now you might not need Ether as much, or I don't know. Maybe now people could start building a competing blockchain with a digital dollar as the payment leg. That's a good question. I wish I had a crystal ball for you.
Yeah, hey, there's no doubt. Like this year, when paychecks or whatever the stimulus checks were being sent out in the United States, we all had a moment where we, we've talked about it for years, but it really felt frustrating to recognize all this paper, time, and effort is about to be wasted. And if if everyone could adopt using stable coins, like this could be done much more quickly, even despite the issues with adoption and despite like the challenge of educating people. I just felt at such a loss of like, gosh, like why can't we get there sooner? And then with with what happened in terms of interference in the US elections 4 years ago, and whatever efforts had taken place this year, which seemed to have been mitigated quite a bit, thankfully. That's another thing that you and I think we're excited about, like being able to vote on a blockchain, being able to just make voting easy, make it mobile, put it on my phone, put my fingerprint in or whatever I've got to do. Like I want, everyone to be able to vote like that until you get to 100% participation. Like, I think there's room to improve, and that if anything was, we've had all of these, I guess what I'm trying to point out is we've had lots happen in 2020 that I think has clearly demonstrated we need digital currencies. We need to move to a medium of exchange that's digital and provable on Ethereum or any blockchain, but I think Ethereum's got the best shot. And we need to be able to vote on a blockchain, and just all this sort of opportunity, to demonstrate to others like this needs to happen now. This is not we're not pie in the sky thinking or putting out things that could never happen.
Yeah, I think what needs to happen is the user interface needs to get a lot better. I would hope that when you hear about the early internet, it wasn't AOL was one thing, but Netscape is what sort of like brought the world to the internet and made it easy for people to use a web browser for the first time. And I'm not sure we have that yet. I think the wallets are getting better, but I think it still feels too easy to me, like that you can kind of screw up and lose your coins or send them to the wrong address. And
Yeah.
it's I think you want people, like, getting back to what we were talking about earlier. I want to be able to buy my groceries with crypto or whatever, like, and I want it to be kind of fail safe, as easy as swiping an ATM card. And I think you probably agree. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, Matt, do you think is self custody, is that something that like people want? Because I that's probably my biggest challenge in trying to talk with others and trying to educate on DeFi or crypto in general is, I'm always very cautious about, like, you are taking 100% responsibility of wealth if you hold it in one of these wallets, and so you have to make sure that this cannot fail. And there's been great examples this year with smart contract wallets that don't have a seed phrase like Argent, but as you pointed out, like, there's a challenge still for the UX to improve. But anyways, do people want non-custodial wallets? Like, what do you think? Like, will the traditional finance world, like, is this the way we're going, or is it impossible to get away from custodial services?
I think there are some people who definitely want self custody, and it's just, there's an ethos to it in the community, and that's
Yeah.
the sort of DIY aspect has always been there, and is a very powerful part of the reason a lot of people got into this and built these systems in the first place. But you're right, convenience has its allure. I I I wonder if banks, might get involved here to be a sort of intermediary and make it easier for you to use crypto in everyday purchases or to pay bills, but then also lend some protections, some sort of FDIC protections, because I think it's slowly dawning on people in the government and in Congress that this is a new form of money, and that it's an advancement, and it should be treated that way. And so, I could see a middle ground where I still have my keys, but I've got some sort of intermediary that's helping me just feel a little bit safer about it all. And maybe it's a USAA card that is linked to my USAA, like they allow you to have crypto on USAA. So, maybe it just draws from my account, like similar to an ATM card. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
what's fascinating here is that the sky is kind of the limit, and if people are willing to take risks and make hybrids, that's what a new industry does. And I think it's why it's so interesting and so fast paced.
Matt, do you think that President-elect Biden's administration is good for crypto? Like, anything that you know about folks they might add to their administration, or any sort of thoughts they might have shared in terms of how they would think about cryptocurrency?
To be honest, I'm not really sure on that. The only person I know that's in the transition team is Gary Gensler, who was a former chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
Mhm.
After he left, he has gotten involved in crypto, and has done. I think he was at the MIT Blockchain Institute. If I'm not sure about that, but he's written on it, and so I've heard his name for maybe Treasury Secretary or something like that, or at least helping to set the stage for who is in charge of the different departments under a Biden administration. I think it can't get worse than the Trump administration, because I don't think they had anybody really on this. It doesn't feel like it was a priority for them. So I think at the agency level, you definitely have some people at the CFTC who are familiar with crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain and Ether. You've got Hester Pierce at the SEC, and I think the OCC has been has been making some has been talking about it, from the banking side of it in terms of digital currencies. So, and I hope, I think Congress needs to get involved, because I think they need to give those agencies guidance on where they think things should go, and ways that this new technology can be implemented into the traditional financial system.
I'm curious, just, as a journalist, what is it like to be a journalist in 2020? A lot has changed in 4 years, and just wondering, what are some of the pressures you feel to report objectively and to be able to report on? I think what you've highlighted for me today is you really look to report on, in the case of Ethereum, what has happened, what is happening, versus offering an editorialized view, which I think I definitely drift into that. We try to share all these stories on Yield TV, but at the end of the day, I clearly have a strong opinion that leans bullish on Ethereum long term. Anyways, what's it like to be a journalist in 2020? I can't imagine how hard it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy being an enemy of the American people, but beyond that, I mean, crypto has always been crazy, and vocal and in your face. And a few years ago, when I was writing about XRP and Ripple, it gets nasty. Writing about Tether and Bitfinex also gets nasty. And it's also an interesting space, coming from a traditional Wall Street background, where you go to JP Morgan's webpage and here's their whole media list. Here's who covers what, phone numbers, emails. Crypto, you're lucky if you can find I don't know, just anything about projects, and who to contact. It's probably some Discord group that you have to join, so.
Yeah, Discord. You're right, Matt. That's probably the best place to go at this point.
Yeah, so it's when you need to get through to people who are behind something in crypto, it's very hard, and that's just a basic thing any reporter needs to be doing. So having sources and people who you trust and who trust you, it's never been more important. And then I think you were getting at. I just always strive to tell as many sides of the story as there are, and let people get their view out there if they want to. And I think sometimes that gets lost when people. I think the news readership is changing more, the habits and the expectations might be changing more than the news business itself. So when readership doesn't get stories that they want, that confirm their bias already, they get mad and they think it's fake news. And so I don't know what to do about that, except to just keep doing what I've always done and just try to do it straight.
Matt, I've got one last question for you. Going back to the book, what do you think is the least understood part of Ethereum's history? Of all that you tell in the book, what do you think folks maybe debate the most, or that they're just not aware of based on your research?
Well, for me, it was going back to, again, the leadership that came around, that was formed around Vitalik, and that went on to become the Ethereum Foundation. They did a lot of great work. They were transparent in a lot of ways, but I don't think many people knew, outside that inner circle, what a shit show it was, because it wasn't just those early firings that happened 6 months after the co-founders were created and formed. There was another round of firings 8 months later, and then another round where they wanted to bring in a professional board of directors and an executive director. And right off the bat, the executive director, Ming Chen, and the 3 board members just hated each other because they didn't get along. And Ming was, one of the funnier parts of the book is she was texting with her sister about how she already wanted to get some of the board members removed. They hadn't even met yet. It turned out she wasn't texting with her sister; she was texting with one of the board members. So she like they were scheduled to meet the next week. That guy didn't show up, and like they basically dissolved the board. Vitalik dissolved the board about a month later. But you know, they already had the knives out for each other, like before they had like sat down and met each other in person. And yet Ethereum kept chugging along, and the developers like Gavin and Jeff Wilkie and Vitalik and people who came on just kept doing the work and writing the code and making sure that everything, you know, was in place for the launch. And so I think it's a fun read. You know, it gets a little bit soap opera at times, but the personalities are so fascinating, and we're not even getting into, you know, a lot of the other people like Roxana and Mihai, who created Bitcoin Magazine with Vitalik, and getting into Charles Hoskinson and Anthony Diorio and the power struggles there, and Joe Lubin, and you know, it was just like, as a reporter and a writer, I was just like, oh, this is like heaven for me, because you know, the details just like it's like a detail like in the DAO. The bug was in line 666 of the code. I mean, like, if I made that up, you'd say, you know, shut up, take that out, it's stupid. But that's the reality, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg in the kind of detail and the fascinating stories that surround this amazing new technology.
I want to see a movie made based on the book. I think you know, just at the end of the day, this is a book that because of, I think, the future successes ahead of us with Ethereum, I think it's going to be really interesting to see as folks trickle in, more and more folks, like, they're going to be curious to learn about our history. And I'm very kind of grateful that you documented all of this. And yeah, I would highly recommend folks check it out. It's, you know, wherever books are sold, but most of us will go to like a Kindle, go to Amazon, listen to it on Audible. It's just fascinating to look back at that history. And I think, if anything, like what you've called out is there's the opportunity to learn about what happened early on. Because I think that, you know, just like markets, we cycle through the same behaviors in everything that we do. And, you know, you want to do what worked, and you want to avoid the same pitfalls, even though I swear we all make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Matt, anything else that you'd like to share, or just, you know, are hoping folks will, you know, learn from all the research that you've done on Ethereum?
No, we've covered a lot of ground here. This has been fascinating and a lot of fun. And yeah, if like, we've maybe talked about 10% of the book, there's so much more in there. What I really liked, which I didn't necessarily set out to do, but at the end of the day, I think it ended up happening, is I think there's a really nice profile of Vitalik Buterin. If you want to know about him, apart from the Ethereum part of his life, like, I talked to his high school teachers, I talked to his mom and his dad and his stepmom. I feel like, and he shared emails with me that he was sending home to friends as he was traveling through Europe. And you know, I find that I was really happy with how that came out, as he comes out as a rounded, three-dimensional human being, you know, with flaws and attributes and victories and defeats. And so I think you know, anybody who's interested in that, I think check out the book. I think you'll be pleased with the way that it's kind of a coming of age story of Vitalik and what he brought to the world.
Yeah, I have said over and over again to peers and friends and family that I think Vitalik will definitely be like a Time Person of the Year in our lifetime. Like, he's on a track to really change the world. He has already changed the world, but I think, as you were putting it, like, at the end of the day, it's fascinating that he is, you know, he's a person, and he has his own flaws, and he's very, like, open and forthcoming about that. You know, just following him on Twitter, like, he just shares a lot of, I want to say, like, he's very vulnerable. He's willing to open up and admit mistakes, and it's fascinating. You can imagine if we could all have done that with like a Steve Jobs back in the day, but we're living through an era now with social media where you can learn so much about someone. And I believe I personally believe he's a role model, and for many of us, and he's a great role model. So anyways, check out the book. There's like so much more that we haven't talked about here. And Matt, we'd love to have you back anytime. Keep up the great work. So appreciative of all the reporting you do with Bloomberg. If it weren't for the writing that you do, I would argue that there would be, at this point, there would be millions less who would actually know about Ethereum. But thankfully, with the credibility of like a Bloomberg, you guys just bring so much more to the forefront.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been really fun and really interesting conversation. I really liked it.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks everyone. We'll be back on Monday with another episode of Yield TV. I have to double check here. I can't remember. On Monday, it's oh, that's right. We're having one of the founders from Diversify, or it's Diversify. It's a DEX. It's powered by a layer 2 solution. So that'll be interesting to dig into. But also, I will link out of the ether in the show notes for this. So this will be up on Zapper YouTube, and you can go to tv.zapper.fi to find that. So anyways, thanks everyone. Bye, Matt. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much.